Before I tell this story, I need to mention that I have prosopagnosia, a condition that prevents me from recognizing faces. It's not something I share with many people because it's hard to explain. I can see perfectly fine, but faces just don't stick in my memory. I identify people by voice, hair, clothes, the way they walk. I mention this because to this day I wonder if I'd recognize the person if I saw them again. This happened in January last year. I had just moved to Bend, Oregon for a remote graphic design job. The company had a program that paid for employees to live in smaller cities, and I'd always wanted to live near mountains. I rented a house on the outskirts of town, close to the Deschutes National Forest. It was perfect quiet, surrounded by nature, and really close to several trails. I have a German Shepherd named Kodiak, or KO for short. He's 4 years old and has tons of energy, so forest hikes were essential. The trail he used most was 5 minutes by car from my house, a loop of about 3 miles that went through huge pine trees. I had some sections alongside a frozen creek. It was a Saturday afternoon, around 3 p.m. It had snowed hard the night before, so everything was covered with that fresh, fluffy snow. The sky was gray and overcast, the kind that makes it seem later than it actually is. As always, I let KO off the leash as soon as we entered the trail. He took off ahead, diving into the snow, completely happy. I walked for about 40 minutes when I reached a part of the trail that forks. One path continues the main loop, the other leads to a wildlife observation area I'd never explored. I decided to take that second path, since it was still early and KO was full of energy. The trail got narrower and narrower, and after about 15 minutes, I noticed there were no more human footprints, just mine and KO's. This made me a bit uncomfortable, but also kind of adventurous. I continued until I reached a small clearing surrounded by dense trees. In the center, there were the remains of a relatively recent campfire, with ashes that still hadn't been completely covered by the previous night's snow. I spent a few minutes looking at the clearing. There was nothing obviously wrong, but something made me uneasy. Maybe it was the fact that to get there, someone would have had to walk the same trail as me, but I hadn't seen any footprints. I called KO and we decided to head back. The sun was starting to go down and I didn't want to be in the forest in the dark. On the way back, KO started acting strange. He'd stop every few yards, look back, growl softly. I tried to trust his instincts, so I picked up the pace. That's when I noticed there was a new set of footprints in the snow. Large footprints, from boots, following the same path I'd taken. But they hadn't been there when I passed before. My heart raced. I turned my boot over to compare. The footprints were much larger than mine. I looked at KO, who was completely alert now, staring fixedly back at the trail. There were no other forks, so whoever made those footprints had to have passed me while I was at the clearing. But I hadn't seen or heard anyone. I kept walking, trying not to panic. With each passing minute, it got darker. KO was glued to my leg now, which was unusual for him. Then he stopped completely and started barking, not that excited bark when he sees other dogs, but an alert bark, deep and aggressive. I turned around and saw him. There was him behind me. Tall, probably around 6'2", wearing a dark gray winter coat and black snow pants. He had a beanie pulled down to his eyebrows and a scarf covering the lower part of his face. Because of my condition, I wouldn't be able to identify his face, even if it was uncovered. But that moment of realizing someone was so close without making a sound froze me. He didn't say anything, just stood there, in his pockets, look at me. I tried to be polite, said hey and something about the weather, hoping he'd pass me on the trail. But he didn't move, just kept standing there. KO was barking nonstop now. I decided to just keep walking, keeping KO close. I didn't look back, but I could feel the man was following me. Not running, not making noise, just following, The distance seemed to always stay the same, about 20 feet. I walked faster. The presence behind me kept pace. When I finally reached the parking lot, I was almost running. My car was the only one there. I quickly put KO in the back seat, got in, locked the doors and drove off. Only when I was on the main road did I breathe a sigh of relief. I looked in the rearview mirror. There was no one there. I got home around 5 p.m. It was completely dark. I followed my normal routine, fed KO, made dinner, tried to convince myself it had just been a weird hiker. But I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints that weren't there before. Around 11 p.m., I went to bed. KO always sleeps in my room, in a dog bed in the corner. Around 2:30 in the morning, I woke up to him growling. It wasn't a loud growl, but continuous, deep, coming from the back of his throat. He was standing, staring fixedly at my bedroom window. My bedroom is on the second floor. I got up slowly and looked where KO was looking. At first, I didn't see anything, just the backyard covered in snow under the dim light of a distant street lamp. Then my eyes adjusted. There were footprints in the snow in my backyard. A single set of boot prints coming from the tree line at the back of the property, crossing the yard, stopping directly beneath my window, and then going back to the forest. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my phone and called 911, explaining the situation in a low, shaky voice. They said they'd send a unit. I sat on the bed with KO, holding a baseball bat, waiting. Each minute felt like an eternity. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. 2 officers checked the property, examined the footprints, took photos. The footprints were clear. Someone had walked up to beneath my window, stood there long enough to leave deep marks in the snow as if they'd been standing for several minutes, and then gone back to the forest. There were no signs of attempted break-in. Nothing had been touched. One of the officers asked if I'd had any strange encounters recently. I told them about the man on the trail. He exchanged a look with his partner. Apparently, there had been some reports of a man following women on various trails in the area over the past few weeks, but no one had been able to get a good description of him. Because of my prosopagnosia, I couldn't identify him even if I wanted to. The police said they'd increase patrols in the area, but recommended I stay with someone for a few days. I called a coworker who had become a friend and stayed at her place for 4 days while they installed better locks and a security system at my house. I never got a follow-up from the police about finding anyone. Since then, I've never walked alone on those trails again. KO and I still go out, but only on very busy trails during the day and always with pepper spray in my pocket. I sold that house 6 months later and moved closer to downtown Bend. What still haunts me is a simple question. How long did he stand beneath my window that night? The marks in the snow suggested several minutes, maybe more. Just watching, waiting. And how many other nights might he have been there that I didn't wake up to notice? I need to start by explaining that I'm an audiobook translator. I work from home, and my job requires me to use professional noise-canceling headphones, the kind that completely blocks out any external sound. I spend between 8 to 10 hours a day wearing these headphones, completely acoustically isolated from the rest of the world. I mention this because it's central to what happened. My name is Sarah. I'm 32 years old, and at the time I lived in a ground-floor apartment in Burlington, Vermont. It was January, the middle of Vermont's harsh winter, the kind of cold that leaves everything frozen and quiet. My apartment faced a small garden shared between my building and the building next door. In early January, the neighboring building started a renovation. Jackhammers, hammering, loud music. It was constant sonic chaos. This made me use the noise-canceling headphones even more than normal. I literally put them on in the morning and only took them off at the end of the day. After about 3 weeks working in this total isolation mode, I started noticing small strange details when I took the headphones off at the end of the day. A living room window that I was absolutely certain I had locked in the morning was unlocked. A glass in the sink I didn't remember using. My couch, blanket folded differently. At first, I thought I was just being forgetful from working so much, but the small details continued. A kitchen chair pulled out, snow marks on the entrance rug I hadn't made, the bathroom cabinet door ajar. I got worried enough to buy a cheap security camera on Amazon, one of those that records in a loop on an SD card. I installed it in the living room, positioned to capture the window and front door. But for some reason, I always forgot to check the recording. Part of me didn't want to know. This went on for another week. Then, one Thursday night, I forced myself to review the recordings. I started fast-forwarding through the morning, saw myself leaving to get the mail, coming back, putting on the headphones, sitting at my work desk. I kept fast-forwarding. At 2:23 p.m., my stomach turned. The living room window opened. Someone came in. It was a man wearing regular clothes, jeans, winter coat, beanie. He closed the window behind him softly, and then he stood still. Just stood there, watching me while I worked, completely oblivious, with my noise-canceling headphones on. He stood there for 18 minutes. I checked the recording timer. 18 minutes just watching me work. Then he slowly walked around the room, looked at some things, moved the couch blanket slightly, and left through the window. My hands were shaking as I rewound the recording. I checked the day before. Same thing, and the day before that, and the one before. 5 days in a row, always around 20 p.m., he'd come in. Stand there watching me for 15 to 20 minutes, sometimes touch small things, and leave. I called the police immediately. 2 officers came, saw the recordings, were visibly disturbed. They asked for copies of the videos. Asked if I recognized the man. I didn't. Asked if I'd had any strange encounters lately. Anyone asking about my apartment. Anything. Nothing. They checked the window. The lock had been forced, but so carefully that I hadn't noticed. They recommended I stay with someone while they investigated and get better locks installed. I stayed with my sister for 3 days. When I came back, new locks were installed, better cameras placed by the police. I thought I was safe. 2 weeks passed without incidents. I started to relax a bit. Although I could no longer use the noise-canceling headphones without stopping every few minutes to look around. Then, on a Tuesday, I got an email. No subject, from an address that was just random letters and numbers. I opened it. It was a photo of me, working at my computer, taken from outside the living room window. Taken that morning, I recognized the shirt I was wearing. Below the fold, a single line in the camera, all the heart stopped. I checked all the cameras. Immediately he was right. There was a blind spot, a corner of the room near the bookshelf where the cameras didn't reach perfectly. I called the police again. They came, repositioned cameras, checked everything, increased patrols in the area. But the officer was honest with me. Without knowing who he was, there was little they could do besides respond if he showed up again. I couldn't stay in that apartment anymore. Even with the cameras, even with the new locks, even knowing the police were watching. I broke my lease and moved to an apartment on the 4th floor of a building downtown with 24-hour security. They never found out who it was. There were numari photos. But I changed careers 3 months later. I can't use noise-canceling headphones anymore without panicking. The acoustic isolation that used to be my work tool became my biggest nightmare. What haunts me isn't what happened, but what could have happened. Why was he just watching? What was he waiting for? And the question that won't let me sleep, if I hadn't checked those recordings, how long would this have continued? 2 months, frågetext, message for number. Just one line your new apartment. 4th floor. Left window. I changed my number the next day. But sometimes, when I'm working, I take off whatever headphones I'm wearing and just listen. I need to hear the world around me. Because now I know silence can hide anything.